Welcome to another episode of Post Whatever with Ken Nishikawa. The Doomsday Clock currently stands at 85 point to midnight. Actually, that's a 3-second update, closer towards humanity's self-inflicted catastrophe. The harder we strive to protect our countries, the more efficiently we accelerate towards total annihilation. Such is the magnificent absurdity of patriotism. Today, I'd like to debunk its myth. It will almost certainly offend some people, which is frankly good for the algorithm, so do please feel free to be offended. Since the greatest minds from the dawn of civilization have risen to the challenge of persuading people to overcome their patriotic instincts and embrace unconditional, universal, cosmic love, and failed miserably, including John Lennon and Jesus Christ, I probably don't stand a chance of producing a remotely convincing argument here. But I'll give it a go. It's all for fun, you know. Consider this a kamikaze mission on behalf of common sense. Ever since I was very young, whenever someone said, "I'm proud of my country," I wondered precisely what it is they are proud of. I'm not ashamed to be filed under Japanese. However, my logical mind raises an objection. How can anyone be proud of something that has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with their own merit or achievement? I didn't achieve being Japanese. It was an accident of geography and biology. I couldn't possibly take pride or credit in something that was handed to me entirely by chance. That would be like taking credit for the weather. Another perennial source of bewilderment is hearing people say, "Japan is the best country in the world." Needless to say, this behavior is not unique to the Japanese. Almost everyone is prone to it. If you know anything about objective thinking, you'll quickly realize it is an embarrassingly groundless and unscientific opinion or argument. The only person, if there is one, genuinely entitled to make such a statement, in my view, is someone who has lived in each and every country on the planet for at least a year, fully immersed, interacting with local people only, no hanging out with fellow expats to bitch about your adopted country, speaking the language fluently, deeply understanding the culture from the inside. Since there are 195 recognized nations today, it would, in theory, take 195 years at minimum to complete this. While it is entirely your prerogative to say you like your country, to say your country is better than someone else's carries, to me, absolute zero weight of conviction. I'd go so far as to suggest it is mildly rude. It's like saying my mother is superior to your mother. Well, that'll most certainly make me look super smart, won't it? This phrase may be most common amongst Americans who are particularly fond of "We are the greatest country in the world." Well, what does greatest mean exactly? If you mean collective wealth or economic strength, then fine, arguably, yes. But what does that have to do with you individually and personally? The United States does indeed have the greatest number of billionaires, with Elon Musk reportedly on course to become human history's first trillionaire, currently hovering just beneath $1 trillion at around 800 billion, depending on which index you consult, or whether you're feeling optimistic about Tesla. Incidentally, Elon was not born in America. He was born in South Africa, immigrated to Canada and became an American citizen only in 2002, which makes him the physical embodiment of the very people many of his political mates would prefer to deport. But I digress. My wild guess is that most of my beloved American listeners are not themselves billionaires. So let us look at living standards for working class and middle class households instead. In terms of annual median household disposable income, yes, the United States does come out on top, followed closely by Luxembourg, Norway and Switzerland, which is kind of predictable. However, as any good professor will tell you, numbers mean very little until you know how to read them. while a middle-class American household has more raw cash to spend or save than their counterparts in those European nations. The American family must pay directly out of pocket for childcare, health insurance, and higher education tuition, all of which are largely provided free of charge in most of Europe, and certainly those countries that I mentioned earlier. When you subtract those overheads from the disposable income, the claim that middle-class Americans are the richest people on earth becomes, to put it charitably, a questionable argument. Also, when it comes to life expectancy, the average Japanese person has around 5 extra years to live compared to the average Americans. More importantly, in terms of healthy living years, the years you actually enjoy rather than merely endure, Japanese people have roughly 6 to 7 more bonus years than the average American. And I won't even bother getting into the subject of safety on the street, at schools, and just day-to-day life in general. And it's allegedly still the greatest nation in human history. And before you say anything, America as the greatest land of opportunity is also, I'm afraid, a myth. If opportunity means the ability of a child born into a low-income family to rise to the middle or upper class, that is to say, meaningful social mobility, the Scandinavian countries again, like Denmark, Norway, Finland and Sweden, consistently rank at the very, very top. The United States fares rather well for tech startups and scaling businesses, I'll grant you that. However, you still need startup capital. If you haven't got any money, the land of opportunity will look you directly in the eye and wish you the very best. Where the United States genuinely and absolutely excels is in defense. America enjoys unchallenged hegemony in sea and air power, and together with Russia holds the world's largest nuclear arsenal, by far. Again, what does any of that mean to the average working person? Would you be proud of your country for possessing the largest package of atomic fireworks in the world? Well, someone might say, we need all this to defend ourselves from the Russians, the commies. To which I would quote the American artist, late great Frank Zappa. Who's going to protect us from the US Army? By the way, I've been to America and I liked it there. I really liked it there. I enjoyed it. Some of my best mates are Americans. Therefore, I am not defying Americans per se. I'm defying anyone who claims their country is the best or the greatest. My internal response to which is, oh, that's cute. You know, it's like hearing a sweet little 3-year-old announce that they've got the best mum or the greatest dad in the world. Adorable. Statistically unverified. It ceases to be cute, however, when those cherished illusions start jeopardizing the survival of the human race. Perhaps we fully deserve it. We believe ourselves to be the cleverest creatures in the known universe and may, in fact, be precisely stupid enough or just short enough on wisdom to be the first species to argue itself into extinction. Well, the dinosaurs at least had the excuse of an asteroid. We humans are mammals, and mammals are, by definition, territorial. So perhaps being patriotic, even the will to sacrifice one's life for one's country, is simply encoded in our genes. Or is it? I've got a reason to believe that modern patriotism is not a natural instinct, but rather a deliberately engineered product. And to explain why, we need to examine our greatest communication tool, language. Until the 1880s, if you lived in Tokyo, recently renamed from Edo, you would have had considerable difficulty understanding someone from the far north of Honshu or from Kyushu. As for Okinawa, that was effectively a different language altogether. It's fair to say that before the 1880s, the gap between the speech of Edo and that of, say, Aomori or Kagoshima was comparable to the difference between Danish and Swedish today, or Spanish or Portuguese if you like, sharing the root, but functionally unintelligible in practice due to phonological drift. The Tsugaru dialect of Aomori underwent severe vowel merging and nasalization. Kagoshima's speech clipped vowels heavily and shifted pitch accent systems, not to mention an entirely unique set of vocabulary. And because of Okinawa's geographic isolation, the linguistic distance between Edo and the Ryukyuan Islands was closer to that between English and Dutch today. Modern linguistics classifies Japanese and Ryukyuan, old Okinawan languages, not as dialects of one tongue, but as sister languages within the Japonic language family. Just like an English speaker might recognize a few modern Dutch words written down. For example, water is spelled exactly the same. Huis, H-U-I-S, you can kind of guess that's house. Groin for green. But find spoken Dutch completely incomprehensible. An Edo speaker in the 19th century would find spoken Okinawan, likewise, completely alien, despite a shared ancient grammatical structure. Fast forward to 2026. If you visit those aforementioned places in Japan, listen to locals talking amongst themselves, you may still struggle. I certainly will, I'm sure. But the moment they address you directly, they switch to perfectly intelligible standard Japanese. A different intonation perhaps, but you'll follow it. Nationwide television certainly played a role in this homogenization. But it was also the result of a very deliberate and rather self-serving policy by the Tokyo government. A classic example is the Hogenhuda, literally dialect card. It was a wooden tag used in Okinawan schools to suppress the local Okinawan languages and enforce standard Japanese to the kids. If a student was heard speaking an Okinawan word at school, the teacher made them wear the plaque around their neck as public humiliation. The student wore it until they caught another classmate committing the same offense, at which point the card was transferred to the new transgressor. The pupil still wearing it at the end of school day received corporal or academic punishment. This, if I may say so, barbaric and abominable practice was voluntarily adopted by some Okinawan students at the start of the 20th century, but became mandatory as assimilation policies intensified after 1917. From the 1930s onwards, during the militarization of Japan, standard language enforcement tightened further. Speaking Okinawan was framed as unpatriotic, even as potential espionage, leading to the card's extended use beyond schools and into civilian life as the Japanese military saw the strong dialect as setback for the island's defense, and the practice persisted well into the 1960s. This is not an isolated example. Similar practice occurred in many parts of Japan, except maybe Osaka and Kyoto, where people are too proud of their language to conform to the Tokyo government. But everywhere else, precious local languages and dialects were systematically destroyed. This was all a part of modernization, and by modernization they mean westernization of Japan. The Okinawan Hogenhuda has striking, almost identical parallels in the histories of both Britain and France, where centralized governments actively weaponized the education system to stamp out regional identities. Another famous example. The British used what they call the Welsh knot, a wooden token worn by any child caught speaking Welsh in school. Evidence of its use dates back to the late 18th century, with the practice more widespread in the early to mid-19th century. The token, or the Welsh knot, was passed from pupil to pupil through mutual surveillance. Whoever held it at the end of the day faced punishment. Now you know where the Okinawans got the idea from. Meanwhile, in France, the systematic suppression of regional languages, Occitan, Breton, Basque, Alsatian and others, began intensely during the French Revolution and reached its peak during the Third Republic in the late 19th century. At the time of revolution, only about 3 million out of 25 million French population could speak French properly, meaning roughly 88% of the population were, technically speaking, not French in any linguistic sense that pre-gen revolutionaries would recognize. Revolutionary leaders viewed regional languages as remnant of feudalism and tools used by counter-revolutionary to hide from the Republic's law. and I expect you can guess the rest. What the Okinawans called Hogenhuda and the British called Welsh Knot, the French called it the symbol appeared, a token or object given to any child caught speaking original tongue, passed from student to student by peer snitching, with punishment awaiting whoever held it at the end of the day. The school was transformed into a surveillance apparatus for the state. Charming. All for what? A manufactured sense of nationhood. Napoleon certainly needed it to conduct his total war. The mechanism is consistent across time and geography. First, central power strips people of their regional identity by taking away their language. Then, it installs a standardized replacement, and with it, a sense of identity carefully designed to serve the government's interests rather than the people's own. Changing the subject slightly, the Japanese word for country or nation is kuni, but in the Edo period or before, kuni simply meant my hometown. It carried no implication of a unified Japanese identity stretching from Hokkaido to Okinawa. The Japanese equivalent of birth certificate in the West is koseki. This shows who your parents are, naturally. However, it also comes with a concept called honsekichi. Now, what is honsekichi? It's one's registered permanent domicile, or administrative home base under family law. Fascinatingly, you can choose any old address you like. Many people born in Tokyo or indeed outside Tokyo have listed the address of the imperial palace as their permanent domicile because there's no law stopping them. It is, when you think about it, one of the more poetic expressions of imagined national identity that any bureaucratic system has ever produced. What I think this whole honsekichi signifies is that the Japanese have been traditionally attached to their kuni, not to an abstract nation, but to the physical place where they were born. Shintoism, with its deep roots in sacred locality and the worship of one's ancestors, has a great deal to do with this, I think. When Japanese people have historically migrated, the move has often been understood as temporary. Like Salmon, many long to return to their birthplace for their final years. This is quite different from, say, the European colonial instinct to arrive somewhere, rename it, and build a pub. Or our beloved neighbor Chinese who built Chinatown everywhere they went. Perhaps this attachment to birthplace rather than nation was precisely why Tokyo government felt it necessary to dismantle the hometown sentiment with such vigor to replace it with a unified Japanese identity better suited to industrial mobilization and military ambition. And I understand the logic, but I have traveled too many miles and made genuine friends from too many nations to be a patriot of any single country. And once you understand what was deliberately done in the name of national consolidation to the rich diversity of traditional cultures, languages, and identities that existed before that project began, it becomes very, very difficult to take the resulting patriotism with any degree of seriousness. This, dare I call it, cultural and linguistic cleansing was carried out in the service of massive industrial mobilization and preparation for total war. And may I remind you that I'm not talking about some distant regime or a convenient historical villain you can point at safely from a textbook. I am talking about the very countries you and I actually live in: Japan, Britain, France, the United States, enlightened, civilized, self-congratulatory nations. You name it, everywhere. I have no doubt in my mind that national consolidation through unified identity and patriotism helped those countries build strong economies and formidable military machine. The project, on its own terms, worked. However, as I have been pointing out, we are paying an enormous price for it. Languages and cultures lost beyond recovery, and worst of all, a logic of us versus them that now threatens the future of our entire species. I like Japan and its language and culture, as I like Britain and its culture and language, because they are, quite simply, the only two I know with any real depth. This is fondness born of familiarity, not cosmic superiority. So, I watched the state of international affairs today with a sense of pity. We could be a magnificent species together, and we continue to choose not to be in the name of patriotism, that in many cases were invented way more recently than we would like to assume. So, would you kamikaze? I wouldn't. On that note, this has been Post Whatever. If you found any of this remotely useful or at least mildly diverting, do consider liking and subscribing. Oh, and a brief update before I go. In episode 3, I mentioned that Cafe Bonnet in Atami had closed. The good news is that it has since reopened. Now run by late owner Masuda-san's wife or partner, I can never quite tell. But thoroughly lovely lady nonetheless. So visit Atami and try the second oldest burger in Japan that Yukio Mishima loved so much. I'm Ken Nishikawa. Until next time, stay safe.